Gave on Wednesday, you might have seen this definition of what a persona is. Now, a persona in the design world is a compromise for never meeting real stakeholders, and it's written by gamblers and liars. Now, you'll be pleased to know that this is not the type of persona that I'm going to be talking about today. Instead, the type of persona that I'm going to be talking about today is the one that we find on the LCA website right here. Now, how many people noticed when they registered that there was this new button? Can I get a quick show of hands? Okay, quite a few people. Good. Now, the problem that we're trying to solve with Persona is this. We want to solve the password problem on the web, no less than that. So that's what we're trying to solve, and especially what we want to move away from is something like this, something you might have seen today, something you might see every day when you use the web, right? The good old username and password form. There are many problems with this. Security is one of them, right? If you've been following the news recently, you will have seen a number of companies apologizing publicly after losing quite a lot of their passwords to hackers. And, you could make fun of any one of them, especially IEEE, for not following best practices and things like that. But the reality of this is that this stuff is hard. It's easy to screw up. And in fact, having passwords for your users is really a liability. If you are going that way, here are the things you have to do, right? You have to hash your passwords using something like bcrypt, script, PBKDF2, one of those complicated things. Then you have to use per user salt values because you can't reuse salt values between users. You have to have a site secret outside of your database so that if your database gets stolen, the attacker is still missing a piece of information. Then you have to have proper password and lockout policies to deter brute forcing of your passwords. And of course, your recovery mechanism has to be just as secure as everything else, otherwise the rest may not exist. But the real problem with this list is this. These are the 2013 password guidelines. I can guarantee you that in 5 years, there'll be even more stuff to do, because this is an arms race between you and the attackers that are trying to steal your passwords. Now, of course, let's be honest about the kinds of passwords that your users will choose. This is the top 1,000 passwords, maybe top 500. And this is not the slide title, the big word in the middle. It's the most popular password. It's a little bit depressing. Now, there's another problem. It's not just about security, and it has to do with conversion rate. If you look at typical metrics for sites, it's not uncommon to see something like this. Lots of people going to your sign-up page, and a lot less people finishing the sign-up process. Now, there can be a lot of explanations for this. You know your site better than I do. But one thing that you should consider is that there is a cost to picking a new username and a new password, or the same username but a different password, just for your site. And a lot of people, a lot of your potential users will have to make a decision. Do I want to remember yet another password, or is this site just not worth it? In other words, that gap is costing you real money. Now, there are existing solutions. Not everybody is using usernames and passwords to log into websites. Here's one that I particularly like. Client SSL certs, right? This is the same type of certificate that you use when you want to expose your site over HTTPS. So you go to a reputable certificate authority, and you pay a bunch of money for some numbers, and then you put that on your server, and that tells to all the browsers out there that your server is legitimate because you paid money for these numbers. Now, you can get a similar type of certificate to put in your browser, and then your browser will hand that over to the various websites that you visit to identify you at those websites. Now, when that works, it's beautiful. It's kind of like SSO for the entire web. You just go to the website, your browser does the rest, and you're logged in. So it's brilliant. How many people, out of curiosity, have used this mechanism to log into a website in the last week? Okay, I don't know, less than 10 people. Last month? Okay, a few more. Last year? Right, still not that many. So it's really hard to actually implement on a web server inside web applications. The support inside browsers is not very good. And the mobile story, multiple devices and stuff, just isn't very good. So almost nobody uses that. Let's talk about something that a lot of people use. The idea of outsourcing your identity to a central authority. Now, these are the two most popular ones, Twitter and Facebook. And of course, there's the obvious problem of what happens to your users that don't have a Facebook account or don't want one, or don't want to log in with Facebook on your website because they think that you're going to know everything about their friends if they do that. Well, that is a problem. But there's another more subtle problem, which is if you are running a business, do you really want to outsource the thing that's perhaps most precious about your business, it's your customers list, to a third-party for-profit company that may change its terms of conditions and exclude some of your users, or may just decide that the service isn't worth running anymore? It's a bit of a risk. But more than that, though, if we're trying to look for a solution for the open web, this is just not it, right? We can't have a private company being the gatekeeper of the internet. What about OpenID? The really great thing about OpenID is that they brought back the idea of federation, decentralization, to the identity space. So in the OpenID world, anybody can be an OpenID identity provider. You can choose who your identity provider is, and you can change identity providers if you want. And in fact, you can also run your own identity provider if you're technically inclined. Now, there are various problems with OpenID. It hasn't seen the sort of adoption that a lot of us would have liked to see. And it has had sort of usability issues. Having a URL instead of a username or something like that is pretty weird for a lot of people. But the reason why Mozilla couldn't get behind OpenID and adopt that as its solution is that OpenID has a very serious privacy flaw. And the best way to explain it is to use an analogy. Imagine that when you last checked into a hotel, and when they ask you for a piece of ID to make sure that the name matches the one on the reservation, imagine if they took your driver's license and then phoned up the government that issued it, right, just verifying that it's valid. Well, that would give that particular government department a trail of every hotel you've ever checked into, which is a little bit creepy. But also, it would allow that government, based on other information that they have, such as, I don't know, maybe you have a student loan that you haven't fully repaid yet, it will allow them to say, well, that student loan you haven't fully repaid, now you're traveling to this other country, and, no, we'll just deny you that stay. You should focus on paying your debts, and after you're debt-free, you can stop going to backpackers. It's a bit of a stretch, but the point here is that that's exactly the kind of power that we give to an OpenID identity provider. So unless you are running your own identity provider, that really affects you. So storing passwords is hard. It's a big mess. And there are no real suitable alternatives for the open web. And that's why we decided to build Persona. Now, Persona, just like OpenID, is a decentralized system. Anybody can be their own identity providers. You can change identity providers if you want, etc. So it's also federated. It is privacy sensitive. So we put the browser in the middle of the chain. So the browser is your trusted intermediary because the browser already sees every website that you're logging into. So it's not a big deal. And we want this to be really simple. Simple both for developers, because if it's not simple for developers to implement, then it's never going to be secure. And we also want to make it simple for users, because if it's not simple for users, then sites are not going to adopt it. So we have a really strong focus on user experience. And finally, of course, like everything else that Mozilla does, this system is fully open source. Now, this is identity in your browser. We want to make the login system of authentication be part of a standard, we want this to be a standard part of the web browser, of all web browsers. It's not a Firefox-specific thing. It should be baked into the web. How does it work? Well, if you only remember one thing from this presentation, it should be this. Persona is based on a concept of a verified email address. Now, I have an email address, here's one of mine, and I have some kind of proof that proves that I own it, and that's all I need to be able to identify myself consistently when I visit websites. How do you get such a proof of ownership? Well, in the system, the authority for whether or not you own a particular email address is, of course, the email address provider. So if you have, I don't know, like a Gmail address, then the authority for that would be gmail.com or mail.google.com. And so the way you get this proof that you own that email address is by simply going to your email provider. So say you log into your webmail, type in your username, your password, you do the whole two-factor auth thing, and then you log in. At this point, the browser will generate a public and private key specific to that identity, and then it will send the public key over to the email provider. The email provider knows who you are because you're logged in, and so at that point, it can sign your public key and return it to you. Now, when I say you, it's your browser. You don't actually see any of that. It happens transparently. This signed public key is what we call the certificate. That's a proof that you own the email address, and it's signed by the authority for that email address. And so the browser stashes this certificate somewhere safe. And so what you have is a signed statement from your email provider that you control this email address. Now, it's very similar to how we use passports for international travel. Because if you want to travel to another country, first thing you have to do is you have to go to your passport office to get a passport, and then you take your passport home, store it somewhere safe. When you do go and enter a new country, then you present your passport and you're let into that country. So the act of getting a credential and using a credential, those two things are separate. So here's what we can do with that certificate that we got proving that we own an email address. This is a demo site that we run, 123done.org, and it's got a button at the top there, sign in with Persona. So I'm going to click on this, and there's a pop-up window that shows on the left all of the email addresses that I have certificates for. So I'm going to pick the second one, and then click sign in. So these certificates are in my browser. And there we go. I'm logged in, if you see at the top there, as that email address. So that's all the user has to do to use Persona. It's like 2 or 3 clicks, and they're in. That's it. So simple as that. From the point of view of the website that you're trying to log into, so in this case, we'll log into the LCA website using Persona, then what happens is that the user sends what is called an assertion. Now, an assertion is a cryptographic bundle that contains 3 things. It contains, first of all, the certificate that you got that proves that you control that email address. Then it contains an audience and an expiry. So the first thing that the site will check is the audience. The audience is the URL of the website that you're trying to log into. Now, the reason why you want to have that in the assertion is that if you had sort of a generic assertion that wasn't specific to a particular audience, then the LCA website could turn around and then log in as yourself, impersonate you onto another website that uses Persona. But that's not going to work because that other website is going to check the audience and we'll get an audience mismatch. That's the purpose of that field. Second one is the expiry. By default, assertions are valid for 2 minutes, so it's just enough time to log you in, but after that the assertion becomes useless. And finally, we need to check the signature on the certificate. So how do we do that? Well, this is just simple public-private key cryptography. And in order to check the certificate that was signed by the email provider, we need to go to the email provider, grab the public key, and then we can check the certificate with that. Now, notice that when you grab the public key from the email provider, that's a site-wide key or domain-wide key for that provider. It's not specific to the user that is trying to log into your site. So you're not revealing anything by grabbing the public key. And in fact, you probably, if it's Gmail, you probably already have a cached copy of that public key because it's likely that more than one user on the LCA website has a Gmail address. Once you've verified that, then everything is valid and you can log the user in. So Persona replaces the password check, but all the rest of session management is the same. You can set your cookie and do whatever you do normally. Now this is a vision of how the system works. There's a big elephant in the room, and that is that if we want the system to work exactly like what I've shown, we need the cooperation of all of these people, right? We need all of the emails provider to be on board. We need all of the browser vendors to be on board. Okay, let's take them one at a time. Let's start with email providers. This is what we want to see. If I've got a Gmail address, it will be signed by Gmail. My certificate will be signed by Gmail. Now, Gmail doesn't support Persona natively yet. If you do work on Gmail and you want to talk to me about that, please do after the talk. But what we have in the meantime is this. We have a certificate signed by persona.org. So in essence, what we have is we have a fallback identity provider. If the domain that you're using doesn't support Persona natively, we fall back to persona.org. The reason why we can sign certificates on behalf of other email domains is simply because the first time you use Persona, we send you an email as part of the registration process, and then it's got a unique link, or a link with a unique token in it. When you click on that, that proves to us that you control that email address. So it's a pretty normal way of checking that. That's what pretty much everybody else does on the internet. And so that's what we do. Now, of course, we don't want you to have to click on an email link every single time you log into a website. So what we do is we create an account for you on that fallback identity provider. And so you don't have to do that every time you want to log in. But what the fallback gives us is that today we support all email providers. So the system is ready to go. We don't have to wait for these people to get on board before we can start using it. But as they get on board, then the system becomes more and more decentralized. Now, the second piece is a little bit trickier. How do we get this inside the browser? Because, as I said, we want this to be a browser feature. We don't want something that's tacked on to the web. This is what we want. We want a new API directly onto the DOM. So navigator.id, whatever, is what we want to achieve. So we could do maybe an add-on, Firefox add-on, Chrome extension, and get people to try to install that. That's quite easy to do. But if you try to convince a site to use Persona as their only login system, then they may ask embarrassing questions like, well, how many users have actually installed the extension? Does that mean that I've only got a 5% chance of having a user successfully log into my site? So not a very good solution for this kind of thing. Another thing we could do is we could build it directly into Firefox, because we're Mozilla and we have people that work on Firefox. But that's kind of, it's better, but it's still like what, a quarter to a third of the browser market? It's not enough. You need a whole lot more if you want to have a credible solution. Well, it turns out Chromium is an open source project as well. We could send patches there and eventually they would make it to the Chrome web browser. Well, that may be true, but we're still missing a couple of browsers. We're still, at most, 2/3 of the browser market, probably less. So not a very good solution either. What we did, in the end, is we used this little-known language called JavaScript to build a complete implementation of Persona in JavaScript. So it works in all modern browsers on desktop, and it works on all of these mobile browsers as well. Did I say mobile first time? Desktop on top, and mobile at the bottom. So that's what we get from using JavaScript to do all of this client-side crypto stuff. Now, if you're interested, this pattern of developing a browser feature and starting with a JavaScript implementation or a JavaScript fallback like this is something called LIFT, for Locally Isolated Feature Domain. Now, the acronym is not super important, but the idea here is that we want to get trusted code executing in the browser. And the way to do that is there's a couple of tricks to it. First one is we have a domain name. That's the domain name that's hosting the JavaScript implementation of Persona for your browser. So the code runs on there, and it uses something called local storage. Now, local storage, for those who don't know, is a very simple key-value store that's built into all modern browsers, and you can easily store and retrieve strings from it. And the particular feature that's interesting to us is that local storage is tied to the domain on which it's executing. So if you have code running on login.persona.org that saves a secret key to local storage, that secret key is only readable from code that's running on that domain. So anybody using Persona on their site can't get to your private key because the private key is only accessible to that domain. So that's why we use local storage. Now, of course, we do need other people, other sites, to interact through a restricted API with the crypto stuff that's stored there. So we use for that post message. Post message is a standard mechanism that web browsers have to do cross-domain message passing. And so we have an API that's built using this. Now the picture looks like this. So we have the site that's trying to use Persona for logins, LCA in this case. We have a post message channel, and then which talks to Persona, which is the only thing that has access to the local storage stuff. Now, just before I give you a little demo of it, are there any questions, sort of burning questions, that prevent you from understanding what I've explained so far? There's a couple? Okay. Just yell them out and I'll repeat them.
Hi, I happen to work for an email provider, and I'm a little bit interested about this thing where you provide something that claims to verify one of our addresses without us being able to revoke it when, for instance, a user gets hacked or gets disabled in some way.
Okay, can you ask that question at the end? Right now, I just want to make sure that it's a very good question, and I'll get to it. But right now, I just want to make sure that everybody understands the system, and so I'll keep going. Yeah. Hold on.
You haven't discussed whether public computers and other public access points, how is this supposed to work with that?
Okay, I'll get to that. Yeah. You got a question?
Yeah, just the post message. Sorry, is that going out from the site you try to log into out the internet to log in Persona?
So the question was, is the post message channel between the site that you're trying to log into and Persona? Yes, it's going between the over HTTPS. Yeah, can you yell out your question?
Can you have more than one persona for each mail account?
The question is, can you have more than one persona for each mail account? Yes, you can have multiple ones. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick demo. Okay, so this is a user that has never logged into Persona before. And this is another demo site that we run, My Favorite Beer. So you click on Persona, and then you type in your email address. There you go. Being asked to create a new password.
Excuse me. Why is there a password in?
So that is because we're sending you an email, and we don't want to send you an email every single time. So the question was, why is there a password? We don't want to ask you to confirm your email every time you log into a website, so you get an account on the fallback identity provider. If I were using a email domain that had native support for Persona, there would be it would just be the password that you have with that identity, with that other organization, not with us. So okay, so the email has been sent. There it is. We'll click here to confirm it, and there we go. So it's confirmed. And now if I go back to this original site, there you go, unlogged in. And well, it seems to be a little bit of a bug. There you go. So as you can see, I really love Australian craft beers. Okay, now, what about if you want to use it on your site? Like, how does it work? How easy is it to implement? Well, go back to the example that I used earlier with 1, 2, 3 done. The first thing that you'll notice if you look into it is that this site has an extra script tag at the bottom of their page. And that says just load login.persona.org/include.js. This is what sets up the JavaScript shim that I talked about, the JavaScript implementation of Persona. Second thing that's in there is there's a setup function called navigator.id.watch. And that has 3 parameters. The first one is logged in user, and that's simply the email address of the user that's currently logged in. So in this case, that would be my email address, but because nobody's logged into, because we haven't logged into 123.org yet, we'll just pass in null. The next thing is a function that will get called when the user logs into your site. So it's called onLogin, and I'll get back to the contents of that. The last part is what happens when the user logs out from your website. In this case, all I'm going to do in my application is redirect the browser to a logout page, and the logout page already clears a cookie, destroys the session server side, that kind of stuff. But this is what happens when we need to log the user out. So okay, I'm going to click sign in, and then the front end will run this function. So navigator.id.request. No parameters needed. That's all you need to trigger the pop-up window that looks like this. Now I'm going to pick the same email that I used earlier and click sign in. And that's when the login callback is invoked. So at this point, what you have is you have a function that has one parameter called the assertion, which is, of course, the assertion that I talked about earlier. So when you get the assertion, what you have to do is you have to verify that it's valid, right, as I said earlier. But you can't do that on the client, because, of course, the client is under the control of the user, and the user could just fake and tell you, yeah, everything is valid, the assertion is valid. So you have to verify the assertion yourself, which means you have to send it to your backend to be verified. So this is just simple jQuery to send the assertion to the backend and then redirect to the home page when everything is done. So let's take a look at what's behind this. Well, let's take a look at the backend. This is what the backend does. Now, this is just Python, but could be C++ if you wanted. It really doesn't matter. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is, if you want, you can use our online verification service at verifier.login.persona.org/verify. Now, what you pass into that verifier is the assertion, of course, and the audience that you expect, so the URL of your site. And what you get in return is this. You get a blob of JSON that has 2 important things in it. You have status, which should be OK if the assertion is valid, and then you have the email address of the user that's trying to log into your site. If you have an invalid assertion, for whatever reason, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see status failed, and then you're going to see a reason why it failed. Now, the important thing to note here is that you don't get the email address when you have an invalid assertion. This is there to prevent people from accidentally logging in people when they have an invalid assertion. So you can't do that because you don't even know who's trying to log in if the assertion is not valid. So if you do have a valid assertion, then that's really all you need to set a delicious cookie in the user's browser and carry on with the rest of the session management. So okay, we're logged in. We're almost done. What happens when the user clicks the logout button? Well, that's when you have to call navigator.id.logout. Again, no parameter. That's all you need to do. And that will trigger the logout callback that we saw earlier. And then your site will do whatever is necessary to log the user out. And that's it. We're logged out. So just to recap, first thing you have to do is to load this external piece of JavaScript. Then you set up your login and logout callbacks. You do whatever you need to do with your backend to log the user in or out of your site. You add your buttons, and you hook them up to the right functions, either request or logout. And then finally, you have to actually verify the assertion that you get server-side. So it's as simple as that. Now, this is a full implementation of Persona. So that's a website that uses Persona, asks people to log in, verifies the assertion, and then says, hi, email address. That's all there is. It's a PHP code. Doesn't use any external libraries except for curl. So it's really quite simple to do on your site. So if you want to help us solve the password problem once and for all, here are a few things that you can do. You can try Persona, add it to your site, to your open source project. That would be much appreciated. And then you can tell us about your experience, because we're really keen to get feedback about what's missing, what's easy, what's hard. Basically, our early adopters set our priorities, quite frankly. And please, email one site that you use every day and ask for Persona support in it, because large sites are not going to implement Persona support until enough of their users are actually asking for it. So you can do that. And if you don't do any of this, then please grab some stickers, at the very least. So available here. And that's it. If you have any questions, then I'll get back to the 2 questions as well. Yeah. So one of the questions was, had to do with shared computers. What we do with shared computers is that the first time that you use Persona, we assume that you are on a shared computer, and so the certificates and all that stuff are only valid for 5 minutes. So if you go away and someone else uses a computer, as long as they have a 5-minute window to do anything with that computer. Of course, if you clear the cookies before you leave, then everything is gone. So that's one thing. Then the second time, that would be really annoying, though, for users to have to enter their password every 5 minutes. So what we do is the second time you use Persona, we ask you whether that's a shared computer or not. And then we adjust the timeout accordingly. Now, there was also a question about how can we sign other domains' email addresses? And so you said that you were hypothetically an email provider.
So basically verifying an identity that's on some email provider's system, right? So it's basically their domain. And you're doing it with some kind of expiry or revocation policy that is nothing to do with whatever the expiry or revocation policy that email provider might want to have.
Yep. So the issue here was the issue that he raised was that what if that user loses access to that email address or something like that? The expiry in our systems is not going to match the expiry in that system. That's an existing problem on the web, because almost every site out there allows for email resets. So it's not a new problem. We're thinking about it. If you have ideas on how exactly that should work, so we're thinking about how to make this better. But one thing that you could do, of course, is implement support for Persona in your email provider, and then you get rid of all these problems. And you can choose exactly how long certificates are valid for your domain, and those sorts of things. Another thing that we'll be rolling out fairly soon is we have this idea of a proxy IDP, which will initially be for Gmail, Yahoo, and Hotmail only, but we might extend it in the future. And what we're going to do is, if you have, say, a Google account, and so you type in a Gmail address, we're going to show you the log into your Google account login page, and instead of sending you an email. And so if you already logged into your Chrome browser, for example, then there won't be any extra password and things like that. And if you stop having control of that Google account, then you won't be able to use it anywhere. So, yeah. All right, start with you.
Does the persona or the assertion tell the third party where to go and fetch the public key in order to verify the assertion?
No, the way that works is that if you are a third-party email provider and you want to have native support for Persona, you're going to expose a file like this. Now, this is a domain that does use Persona natively, and it's got a browser ID. It's exposing a browser ID file, which is a JSON file that contains these things. Contains a public key, so that's what a public key is, and then 2 other sort of endpoints to make the system work. So
So
yep.
that
address will be determined from the email address?
No, the address is fixed, so the address is always your domain and then /.wellknown/browser ID. Some people have asked for DNS, a way to do this in DNS as well, and so we're thinking about adding that as well. But,
Two questions. One, what happens if you've got a computer that's got its time not synced and it's completely screwed, as sometimes happens? And the second question is, can it work with some form of two-factor authentication?
Okay, I'm going to start with the second question first because I'm going to ask you to repeat the first one afterwards. But can we have two-factor auth? Yes, if you run the identity provider, the email server, if you want to run an identity provider for Persona, then you are free to do whatever you want for authentication. So it could be YubiKeys, it could be usernames and passwords, it could be anything you want. Now the first question, was it about what happens if your computer crashes or something like that? Or
if you've got a PC that isn't syncing time and you've only got that 2-minute window, is there some way of saying I need a bigger window or something like that?
So that time is set by the Persona server, and if you use our verifier, it's basically the same machine. So it's not set by your browser. It's set by the identity provider and verified by the verifier. So as long as the identity provider is not too far off. So yes, they should be somewhat reasonable, but at the same time, that's something that we can adjust if we see that that's actually a problem. We haven't seen any problems with it so far, but we might, in the future, we might bump that to 5-10 minutes or whatever. Now I don't know what the mic is, but that was there.
How is this any different to OpenID? I mean, under OpenID, you're handing over, I mean, you said there was privacy problems with it, where you're effectively handing over the list of sites that you visited to Google, for example, who is an OpenID provider. Under Mozilla's Persona, you'd be doing exactly the same thing. The back-end website would be requesting either persona.org or Google if they implemented the back-end there.
Yep, so that's a very good point. What I've shown you is not a fully, it has centralized components, right? That's basically what you're saying. It's the same as OpenID. The big difference with OpenID is that there's no way to fix it in OpenID. That's the way the protocol works. In Persona, it's fully decentralized. The fallbacks that we have that are centralized currently will go away as soon as as people join into the thing, right? Like the JavaScript file that you get to get the JavaScript implementation of Persona will be unnecessary once you have browser support. The account that you have on persona.org for the fallback identity provider, that will go away when your email provider has support for it. And then the verifier is entirely optional. If you want to verify assertions yourself and fetch the keys yourself, you can do that today. There's even a Python library that allows you to do that. Can you repeat that? No, you're not, because you're getting the certificate in your browser ahead of time, and then you're visiting another site. So it's kind of like the passport thing. You're getting the passport, and you're not telling the passport office which countries you're going to visit later using that credential. That's the main difference. Yep, there's a mic.
Oh yeah, nice work. This has been tried before with Athena and Shibboleth, and the thing that really killed both of those was the lack of non-web authentication, because it couldn't be extended from the web into the other protocols that people use. Is it possible to fake up the wireline protocol from non-web sources?
So we are working on sort of like native implementations of Persona, so outside the web, because another place where that's really useful is for on mobile. So people that have native apps might want to do things like that without using a web browser. So yeah, that's certainly something that we're exploring. Currently, it only works on the web, but eventually it will. Yep.
Is there room for a Persona to OpenID bridge?
So is there room for an OpenID bridge? In theory, we could do it. Like, we're going to use OAuth 2 to talk to Google, Gmail, and Yahoo through this proxy idea. So we might decide to do that. We're doing Gmail, Yahoo, and Hotmail first because for most sites, it's about like 80% of their users. But we're not sure that we're going to do a generic OpenID thing because then we run into the same kind of usability problems that OpenID has. So, yeah, there's a question around here, I think. Yep, can you yell it out?
Just wondering about how fixed the current encryption schemes are. If you're doing encryption on mobile in JS and browser, like, are you using elliptic curve for speed of read, or how pluggable is it not moving around?
So the question is how fixed is the crypto that you're using? How easy is it to do on various platforms and things like that? The short answer to that is that it's in JavaScript and it works in Internet Explorer 8. So it's not that demanding. But yeah, like the crypto stuff, we have libraries that some people have written, and we have our own. So right now, if you want to do Persona in Haskell, you will probably have to write the crypto library yourself for that bit. But it uses RSA, AES, and stuff like that. But the sort of certificate format is a new web standard called JWT. So you may not have a Haskell plugin for that yet.
What's the rationale for tying identity so closely to an email address as a requirement, and then having to go through emails as identity providers rather than tying it to the browser by just generating a private key and using that to authenticate and having email as optional metadata?
Yep, so the reason why we went for email is that that's based on user research. So we decided that we had to build a system that users would understand. And the one thing that user identifies themselves with very easily is an email address. Now the other thing with the email address that's really quite interesting is that a lot of non-technical people know how to create a second email address, that's kind of anonymous-ish, and they can have multiple sort of personalities that use different email addresses. They can have an anonymous one. If you want to use Mailinator, you can use Mailinator if you want. So email addresses give us that sort of flexibility. And the other thing is, if you want to use different devices, then it's really easy to have something that's portable and not tied to a specific browser.
So you're going through and showing how relatively simple it is on the back end for someone wanting to make a site with Persona. Mm-hmm. But all the examples had this, hard link. Just go to login Persona.org. As more email providers, allow this kind of thing, do you still have to go there, or does you add in also check Google, also check Yahoo, also check wherever, or does it get more complicated? How does that work?
Well, the code I've shown you, that's what you have to do if you want to add Persona support to your website. When other people jump on board and there's native support in the browser and stuff like that, everything stays the same for you. So that's what you have to do, and that API is stable. It's not going to change.
So you do always send things to login Persona or to verify things still?
So the question is, even with native support, you would still be sending information to persona.org. You would not be sending information because the pop-up window that you see in the native implementation is not actually a pop-up window. It's it's a dialog box in the browser, and so you're not sending a password there or anything like that.
Do you have a usability problem if, say, somebody signs up for Persona with a Gmail address, say, and Gmail doesn't support Persona natively, so it goes through the fallback stuff on persona.org. Then later, Gmail starts supporting Persona natively. Won't all the logins then stop working because now Gmail, who doesn't know about this, is not asserting that they have an account, and the browser therefore isn't going on to persona.org because Gmail is providing an answer?
So during the transition from no support to native support, then the login page that people will see will be different because it will be kind of like it will be a Google signing page where you'd be asked to fill in your Google account, and well, the email will be pre-filled, but you'll see the Google page that will ask for your Google password. In fact, most users will not even see anything because they're already logged into their Gmail, and so it will just go through, and the verification will happen automatically. So, can you yell it out?
Yeah. So I really like the design, but it seems really unfortunate you need to make a new persona.org password to do this. That seems to create the same problem as with OpenID. Is that going to go away at some point, or like why not just send somebody an email the first time they log in from a new device there?
Well, and on that, you're encouraging the user to type in username @gmail.com and then a password that isn't the gmail.com password.
Okay, so the comments were when you're using a fallback identity provider, you're asking users to pick a password, right? And so yes, that's right. I'll talk about that as well. Ideally, we wouldn't have to because there would be native support. But the reality is that we do have to ask for something because otherwise, if we were to send an email every time that it would mean that every time you clear your cookies or use a different browser or you do something with your phone and you have to reinstall it or whatever, you'd have to do another email verification thing. So we decided to do the password stuff because that's kind of the easy thing. Now the follow-up to that was if you're asking users to type in their email address and then their password after that, maybe they'll put in their actual Gmail password. That's quite possible. In fact, for a very large percentage of the population, their Gmail password is their only password on the internet anyways. What we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate as many of these password prompts as possible and bring it down to one, which is the identity provider, the email provider. That one's not going to go away unless you're switching to YubiKeys or something like that. But you need to identify yourself at some point using either something something which is like a password, something you are, like a fingerprint or something you have, like some kind of token, YubiKey or whatnot. So that requirement will remain. But if we can eliminate all of these prompts except for one, that would be as good as it can get, I think.
Unfortunately, that's afternoon tea. So on behalf of the conference and Linux Australia, thank you very much for your speech.